The crimson sunset painted the Missouri sky as Harriet Sinclair gazed through the stained window of the stage coach, her gloved hands trembling slightly against the leather-bound journal in her lap. It was 1875, and Nevada, Missouri was to be her fresh start, or so she prayed. The weight of St. Louis society and its whispers had become too heavy to bear, forcing her westward like so many others seeking to outrun their pasts. "Nevada Station in 5 minutes, madam," called the driver from his perch, his voice weathered like the reins he handled with practiced ease. Harriet adjusted her simple navy traveling dress, ensuring that every button was fastened properly. First impressions would matter in a town where she knew not a soul. At 24, she was neither young enough to be forgiven youthful indiscretions nor old enough to command respect without question. She was simply a woman alone, carrying secrets wrapped in shame. The stagecoach lurched to a stop before a wooden building with Nevada Station painted across its front. Harriet gathered her belongings: one trunk, a carpet bag, and the journal she never let out of her sight. The driver helped her down, his calloused hands steady against her gloved ones. "Thank you," she murmured, pressing a small coin into his palm. "Madam, you'll be wanting Parker's boarding house. 2 streets down, can't miss it. Tell Widow Parker that all Jim sent you." Harriet nodded gratefully and began her walk through the dusty main street of Nevada. The town was modest but busy enough: general store, blacksmith, saloon, and church all standing as sentinels of civilization against the wild backdrop of the frontier. Men in weathered hats tipped them as she passed, while women cast curious glances at the newcomer. Parker's boarding house was indeed unmistakable. A 2-story white clapboard structure with green shutters and a wide porch adorned with rocking chairs. Harriet adjusted her hat, took a deep breath, and climbed the 3 steps to the entrance. Before she could knock, the door swung open, revealing a plump woman with silver-streaked hair pulled into a tight bun. Her apron was dusted with flour, but her eyes were sharp and assessing. "Well now, you must be new in town." "I'm Widow Parker, and you look like you could use a room and a hot meal." "Yes, madam, Harriet Sinclair. All Jim from the stagecoach suggested I might find lodging here. Any friend of Jim's is welcome. Come in, come in. I've got 1 room left, faces the east, so you'll get the morning sun." The widow ushered Harriet inside, chattering about town gossip and the upcoming harvest festival. The boarding house smelled of fresh bread and lavender, a comforting combination that momentarily eased Harriet's anxious heart. "Now, what brings a young lady like yourself to our little corner of Missouri?" asked the widow as she showed Harriet to her room. "I've come to teach," Harriet replied, setting down her carpet bag on the simple iron bed. "I have a position at the schoolhouse beginning next week." This much was true. Harriet had secured the teaching position through correspondence, grateful for her education at the women's seminary in St. Louis. What she didn't mention was the desperation that had driven her application, or the tears that had stained the pages of her recommendation letters. "Well, we've been in need of a schoolmarm since Miss Jenkins up and married that cattle buyer from Kansas City. The children have been running wild for months." Widow Parker chuckled, then her expression softened. "You'll find Nevada to be a good place, Miss Sinclair. Simple folk with simple ways, but good hearts nonetheless." Harriet managed a small smile. "I hope to make a positive contribution, Mrs. Parker. Widow Parker to everyone dear. Now supper's at 6. Rest up till then." When the door closed behind her landlady, Harriet sank onto the bed, exhaustion washing over her. She unlaced her boots and removed her hat, then reached for her journal. The leather cover was worn smooth from handling, the pages within filled with her elegant script confessions, regrets, and prayers for redemption. She didn't cry. She had done enough of that on the journey here. Instead, she wrote a new entry, documenting her arrival in Nevada and her hopes that this small town would allow her the anonymity she craved. Perhaps here, among strangers, she could atone for her mistakes and build a life unburdened by the past. Supper that evening was a simple but hearty affair: roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and fresh biscuits. The other boarders included an elderly bookkeeper, a young clerk from the bank, and a traveling salesman who regaled them with tales from his journeys across the frontier. Harriet spoke little, offering only that she was the new schoolteacher and had come from St. Louis. "St. Louis, eh?" said the salesman, Mr. Phelps, between bites of chicken. "Quite the civilized place compared to our humble Nevada." "I find Nevada charming," Harriet responded politely. "You haven't been here during a cattle drive," laughed the clerk, Mr. Thompson. "The dust and noise would make you long for city comforts." "Actually, the Jackman ranch drives are coming through next week," Widow Parker informed them, refilling coffee cups. "Young Mr. Jackman has taken over since his father passed last winter. Been expanding the operation from what I hear." "Yorkton Jackman," nodded Mr. Phelps. "Met him in Kansas City last month. Sharp fellow, not yet 30 and already commanding respect among cattlemen twice his age." Harriet listened with mild interest, her thoughts more concerned with preparing for her first day of teaching. After supper, she excused herself to return to her room, where she spent the evening reviewing lesson plans and writing letters to the few friends she had left in St. Louis, carefully edited versions of her new life in Nevada. The next morning dawned bright and clear. Harriet rose early, dressed in a modest brown skirt and cream blouse, and set out to familiarize herself with the town. The schoolhouse was her first destination, a one-room building at the edge of town, freshly whitewashed but showing its age in the sagging porch steps and weathered bell tower. Using the key the mayor had sent her, Harriet unlocked the door and stepped inside. Rows of simple desks faced a larger teacher's desk and blackboard. Shelves lined one wall, sparsely populated with worn readers and arithmetic books. It was humble but functional, and Harriet felt a small surge of purpose. Here she could be useful. Here she might find redemption. She spent the morning cleaning and organizing, making notes of supplies she would need to request. Around midday, the door creaked open, startling her from her inventory of readers. "Pardon me, madam," came a deep voice from the doorway. "Didn't mean to intrude." Harriet turned to find a tall man filling the frame of the schoolhouse door. His broad shoulders were silhouetted against the bright sunlight, face shadowed beneath a wide-brimmed hat. As he stepped inside, she could see him more clearly: sun-bronzed skin, strong jawline softened slightly by a neatly trimmed beard, and eyes the color of a summer storm. "Can I help you?" she asked, automatically smoothing her skirt. "Yorkton Jackman," he said, removing his hat to reveal dark hair that curled slightly at the nape of his neck. "Folks call me York. I was passing by and noticed someone in the schoolhouse. You must be the new teacher Mayor Simmons mentioned." "Yes, Harriet Sinclair." She offered a small nod but remained behind her desk, maintaining a proper distance. "I'm familiarizing myself with the classroom before term begins next week." York's gaze swept the room, noting the freshly arranged books and cleaned blackboard. "Looks like you've been busy already." "Nevada's lucky to have a dedicated teacher. The children have been running somewhat wild since Miss Jenkins left." "So I've heard," Harriet replied, unable to prevent a small smile. "I hope to restore some order to their education." "I've no doubt you will, Miss Sinclair." He replaced his hat and moved toward the door. "If you need anything, supplies, repairs to the building, don't hesitate to ask. My ranch hands and I would be happy to assist." "That's very kind, Mr. Jackman, but I wouldn't want to impose. No imposition. Education matters out here just as much as in the city." His eyes held hers for a moment longer than necessary. "Welcome to Nevada, Miss Sinclair." With a tip of his hat, he was gone, leaving Harriet with the strange sensation that the schoolroom had suddenly grown both larger and emptier. She shook off the feeling and returned to her work, though her thoughts occasionally drifted to storm-colored eyes and a voice that somehow managed to be both rough and gentle. The week passed quickly as Harriet settled into life in Nevada. She finished preparing the schoolhouse, attended Sunday services at the local church, and gradually learned the names and faces of townsfolk. Most were welcoming, though some of the mothers regarded her with the cautious assessment reserved for anyone who would influence their children. On Monday morning, Harriet dressed with particular care in her best teaching dress of forest green wool with modest lace at the collar and cuffs. She arrived at the schoolhouse early, heart fluttering with nervousness and excitement as she rang the bell to summon her pupils. They came in a chattering wave, 27 children ranging from 6 to 16 years of age. Some arrived on horseback, others walked from town, all eyeing their new teacher with undisguised curiosity. "Good morning," Harriet greeted them, standing tall despite her inner trepidation. "I am Miss Sinclair, and I will be your teacher. Please find your seats according to age, youngest at the front, eldest at the back." There was some shuffling and whispering as they sorted themselves, but soon all were seated, watching her expectantly. "Education," Harriet began, "is the greatest gift one can receive in this life. It opens doors that might otherwise remain closed. It provides opportunities that might otherwise never arise. In this room, we will learn together reading, writing, mathematics, history, and science. But we will also learn respect, diligence, and the value of hard work." She looked over her pupils, noting the bright eyes of some and the skeptical expressions of others. "Now, let us begin with introductions." The morning progressed smoothly, with Harriet assessing each child's educational level and assigning appropriate lessons. By noon, when she dismissed them for lunch, she felt cautiously optimistic about her new position. As the children scattered to eat their packed meals in the schoolyard, Harriet noticed a familiar figure approaching on horseback. Yorkton Jackman dismounted gracefully from a magnificent chestnut stallion, tying the reins to the hitching post before approaching the schoolhouse. "Miss Sinclair," he greeted, removing his hat. "How fares your first day of teaching?" "Quite well, Mr. Jackman," she replied, stepping onto the porch. "The children seem eager to learn, if somewhat behind in their studies. You'll have them caught up in no time, I'm sure." His smile revealed a dimple in his right cheek. "I've brought something for your classroom." He returned to his horse and untied a bundle wrapped in canvas. Bringing it to the porch, he carefully unwrapped it to reveal several books, a dictionary, an atlas, and 3 volumes of literature. "From my father's collection," he explained. He valued education highly, though his own was limited. "These have been gathering dust at the ranch. I thought they might be of use here." Harriet's fingers traced the embossed leather cover of the dictionary, touched by the thoughtful gesture. "This is extremely generous, Mr. Jackman. The children will benefit greatly from these resources." "York, please," he said. "Mr. Jackman makes me look around for my father." Harriet hesitated, conscious of proprieties. "Perhaps in private settings, but I should maintain formality before the children." Something flickered in his eyes, amusement, perhaps, or approval of her professional boundaries. "Of course, Miss Sinclair. I wouldn't wish to undermine your authority." The school bell rang, signaling the end of the lunch period. Children began filtering back into the schoolyard, eyeing the tall rancher with interest. "I should let you return to your duties," York said, placing his hat back on his head. "My cattle drive passes through town tomorrow. We'll try not to disrupt your lessons too much with our dust and noise." "We'll manage," Harriet assured him. "Thank you again for the books." As he rode away, several of the older boys gathered around Harriet, full of questions. "Was that Mr. Jackman from the big ranch, Miss Sinclair? Is it true he has 100 cowboys working for him? My pa says he's the richest man in the county now." Harriet ushered them inside with a gentle reminder that mathematics awaited. "Mr. Jackman kindly donated these books to our school," she explained to the class, showing them the volumes. "We shall write him a thank-you letter as tomorrow's penmanship exercise." The afternoon lessons proceeded without incident, and Harriet dismissed her pupils at 4 o'clock, watching them scatter in various directions toward homes in town or on outlying farms and ranches. She remained at her desk, recording her observations of each child's abilities and planning the next day's lessons. The sun was beginning to lower in the sky when she finally locked the schoolhouse and began her walk back to the boarding house. As she passed the general store, the owner, Mr. Garrison, hailed her from the doorway. "Evening, Miss Sinclair. How'd the first day go?" "Very well, thank you," she replied, pausing. "The children are bright and eager." "That's good to hear. Say, we received those slate pencils you ordered. Would you like me to have them delivered to the schoolhouse tomorrow?" "That would be most helpful, Mr. Garrison." As they chatted about other supplies the school might need, Harriet became aware of raised voices from the direction of the saloon across the street. A crowd had gathered, and at its center stood a man Harriet recognized as the town marshal, and another man tall and lean with a shock of red hair whose face was contorted with anger. "Trouble brewing," murmured Mr. Garrison. "That's Wade Sullivan. Has a beef with the Jackman ranch over water rights. Been making threats since old Mr. Jackman passed." Before Harriet could respond, the confrontation escalated. Sullivan shoved the marshal aside and drew his pistol, firing a wild shot into the air. "Jackman," he bellowed. "I know you're in town. Come out and face me, you thieving son of a—" "Miss Sinclair, you'd best get inside," Mr. Garrison urged, ushering her into the store as several more shots rang out. Through the window, Harriet watched as York emerged from the telegraph office, his stride purposeful but unhurried as he approached the enraged man. "Put the gun down, Sullivan," York's voice carried clearly, though he didn't raise it. "Whatever grievance you have, this isn't the way to settle it." "Your father diverted my creek," Sullivan snarled. "My cattle are dying of thirst while yours drink their fill." "The water rights were legally purchased," York replied calmly, "but I'm willing to discuss arrangements that might benefit both our ranches." Sullivan's response was another wild shot that sent bystanders scurrying for cover. York didn't flinch, though Harriet's heart leapt to her throat. "Last chance, Sullivan," York warned, his hand hovering near his own holstered gun. "Put it down and let's talk like civilized men." For a tense moment, it seemed Sullivan might fire again. Then, with a curse, he lowered his weapon. "This ain't over, Jackman." The marshal quickly moved in to take Sullivan's gun and escort him to the town's small jail to cool off. As the crowd dispersed, Harriet released the breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "That could have gone much worse," Mr. Garrison commented, returning to his counter. "Young Jackman handled it well. His father might have shot Sullivan where he stood." Harriet nodded absently, her eyes still on York as he spoke quietly with the marshal. She had seen a side of him that contrasted sharply with the considerate man who had donated books to her classroom, a hardness, a capacity for controlled danger that both unsettled and intrigued her. "I should continue to the boarding house," she said, gathering her composure. "Thank you for the shelter, Mr. Garrison." Outside, the street had returned to its normal rhythm, though conversation buzzed with accounts of the confrontation. As Harriet walked briskly toward Widow Parker's, she heard quick footsteps behind her. "Miss Sinclair," York called, catching up to her easily with his long stride. "I apologize you had to witness that unpleasantness." "No apology necessary, Mr. Jackman," she replied, continuing to walk. "Is such conflict common in Nevada?" "Less common than it once was," he answered, falling into step beside her. "The frontier is changing. Law and civilization are taking root, though some resist the change more than others. And where do you stand on such progress?" York considered her question thoughtfully. "I welcome it. The wild days had their place in taming this land, but the future belongs to communities, schools, and courts, not guns and personal vendettas." They reached the boarding house, and Harriet paused at the foot of the porch steps. "A progressive view for a cattle rancher, perhaps." His lips curved in a half-smile. "Or simply a practical one. I hope today's events won't color your impression of our town too harshly." "It takes more than one angry man to deter me, Mr. Jackman," Harriet assured him, her chin lifting slightly in determination. Something in his expression softened. "I don't doubt that for a moment, Miss Sinclair. You strike me as a woman of considerable fortitude." The compliment warmed her unexpectedly. "Good evening, Mr. Jackman, and good luck with your cattle drive tomorrow. Thank you. Until we meet again." As Harriet entered the boarding house, she found herself hoping that their paths would indeed cross again soon, a sentiment that both pleased and troubled her. She had come to Nevada to escape complications, not to court new ones, especially with a man whose mere presence seemed to awaken feelings she had determined to keep firmly dormant. Widow Parker greeted her with questions about her first day of teaching, and Harriet gratefully immersed herself in conversation about her pupils, pushing thoughts of storm-gray eyes from her mind. The next morning dawned with the distant sounds of cattle lowing and cowboys calling to one another. By the time Harriet reached the schoolhouse, the Jackman Drive was passing through the main street of Nevada, hundreds of longhorns guided by skilled riders, dust rising in great clouds that partially obscured the sun. Despite the distraction, Harriet maintained order in her classroom, though she allowed the children to watch from the windows as the massive herd passed. She caught a glimpse of York riding alongside his foreman, checking the progress of the drive. Even at a distance, his commanding presence was unmistakable. The weeks that followed fell into a rhythm. Harriet's days were filled with teaching, her evenings with grading assignments and preparing lessons. She attended church on Sundays, gradually becoming accepted as part of the community. The whispers and shame she had fled in St. Louis seemed distant, though never fully forgotten. She saw York occasionally at church, in town on business, or when he stopped by the schoolhouse to inquire about additional needs. Each encounter left her both more drawn to him and more determined to maintain her guard. Autumn painted the Missouri countryside in vibrant hues of red and gold, and with the changing season came preparations for the Harvest Festival. Widow Parker insisted that Harriet help with the schoolhouse display, which meant working closely with the mothers of her pupils, an opportunity to strengthen community ties that Harriet couldn't refuse, despite her private reservations about becoming too deeply embedded in Nevada society. "Miss Sinclair, would you mind taking these pies over to the judge's table?" Mrs. Collins asked one crisp Saturday morning as they worked to transform the town square into a festive gathering place. "Of course," Harriet replied, carefully balancing 3 apple pies in her arms. As she crossed the square, she nearly collided with York, who was helping to erect the dancing platform. "Whoa there," he said, steadying her with gentle hands on her shoulders. "That's precious cargo you're carrying." "Mrs. Collins's prize-winning apple pies," Harriet explained with a smile. Worth their weight in gold, according to Widow Parker. York relieved her of 2 pies. Allow me to assist. I wouldn't want to be responsible for depriving the judges of such delicacies. They walked together to the long table where several older men and women waited to sample the various entries. Miss Sinclair has been a godsend to our school, York commented to Judge Harrison, the eldest of the panel. The children speak of nothing else at home, according to their parents. Harriet felt a blush rising to her cheeks. Mr. Jackman exaggerates, but the children are indeed making excellent progress. No exaggeration, York insisted. My foreman's son, Tommy, couldn't read a word before you arrived. Now he's devouring every book he can get his hands on. Judge Harrison nodded approvingly. Education is the foundation of civilization, young lady. You're doing God's work. As they walked away from the judge's table, Harriet glanced at York. Thank you for your kind words, though I fear you've raised expectations I may struggle to meet. I only spoke the truth, he replied. You've brought something special to Nevada, Miss Sinclair. Not just learning, but a certain grace. His words hit too close to home, to the very qualities that Harriet had once prided herself on in St. Louis society before her fall from grace. She looked away, fighting the sudden sting of tears. Miss Sinclair, have I offended you somehow? No, she managed, composing herself. You're very kind, Mr. Jackman. I should return to Mrs. Collins. She'll be wondering where I've gone. Before he could respond, Harriet hurried back across the square, chiding herself for the momentary weakness. She had no right to accept compliments about grace or goodness, not with her past. And she certainly had no business developing feelings for a respected rancher like Yorkton Jackman. The festival itself was a joyous affair, with competitions, food, music, and dancing lasting well into the evening. Harriet participated as required of the schoolteacher, judging children's recitations and helping serve at the community supper. When the dancing began, she politely declined offers from several of the town's eligible bachelors, citing fatigue from her duties. As twilight deepened into night, Harriet found a quiet spot at the edge of the festivities. Lanterns cast a golden glow over the dancers, while fiddle music filled the air with lively tunes. She was contemplating a discreet departure when York appeared beside her. You haven't danced once this evening, he observed, offering her a cup of punch. I've been busy with other responsibilities, she replied, accepting the drink gratefully. The evening's nearly over, he pointed out. Surely you can spare one dance. Harriet hesitated, knowing she should refuse but finding herself unable to do so. Very well, Mr. Jackman. One dance. He led her to the platform where couples were twirling to a moderate waltz. His hand at her waist was respectful but warm through the fabric of her dress, his other hand gentle as it clasped hers. Harriet had danced many times in St. Louis ballrooms, but never had she been so acutely aware of her partner. You dance beautifully, York commented as they moved in perfect rhythm. Though I shouldn't be surprised, you do everything with grace. Not everything, Harriet murmured before she could stop herself. York's eyes searched hers, curiosity mingling with concern. We all have our moments of stumbling, Miss Sinclair. It's how we rise afterward that defines us. For a moment, Harriet wondered if he somehow knew her secret, if the whispers had traveled from St. Louis to Nevada despite her precautions. But his gaze held no judgment, only genuine interest. A philosophical rancher, she said, attempting lightness. You continue to surprise me, Mr. Jackman. York, he reminded her softly, we're not in the schoolhouse now. York, she conceded, his name feeling intimate on her lips. The music ended too soon and propriety demanded they part. York escorted her back to the edge of the dancing area, reluctance evident in his slowed pace. May I walk you to the boarding house? he asked. "It's growing late." Harriet knew she should decline, but the night air had turned chilly, and the prospect of his company for a few minutes more was too tempting to resist. "Thank you. That would be kind." They walked in comfortable silence through the quieting streets of Nevada. When they reached Widow Parker's, York paused at the foot of the porch steps. "Miss Sinclair, Harriet," he said, his voice low. "I've enjoyed your company greatly this evening. I wonder if you might consider joining me for a Sunday drive after church tomorrow. The autumn colors along the river are spectacular this time of year." Harriet's heart quickened at the formal invitation. A Sunday drive was a clear declaration of courtship interest, something she had deliberately avoided since arriving in Nevada. "I'm not sure that would be wise," she answered hesitantly. "May I ask why?" His tone held no offense, only genuine curiosity. Harriet struggled to find words that would explain without revealing too much. "I came to Nevada to teach, Mr. Jack York. My focus must remain on my pupils." "Surely even dedicated teachers are allowed moments of pleasure," he countered gently. "The drive would only take an hour or two of your afternoon." His reasoning was sound, and Harriet found her resistance weakening. "Very well," she agreed before prudence could reassert itself. "After the service tomorrow." York's smile was like sunrise breaking over the prairie. "Until tomorrow, then." "Good night, Harriet." "Good night," she replied, climbing the steps and entering the boarding house with her thoughts in turmoil. Widow Parker was waiting in the parlor, a knowing look on her face. "Young Jackman seems quite taken with you," she observed, offering Harriet a cup of tea. "We're merely acquaintances," Harriet demurred, though the flush in her cheeks betrayed her. "He's a good man," the widow said simply. "His father was hard as nails, but York has his mother's kindness along with his father's strength. There's not a family in Nevada he hasn't helped in some way." Harriet sipped her tea, letting the warmth soothe her conflicted emotions. "He's invited me for a drive tomorrow, and you accepted." When Harriet nodded, Widow Parker smiled. "Good. It's time you allowed yourself some happiness, my dear. You work too hard and smile too little." "There's much work to be done," Harriet protested weakly. "There always is," the older woman agreed, "but life isn't meant to be all work and no joy. Now, off to bed with you. You'll want to look your best tomorrow." Sleep came slowly that night, Harriet's mind filled with contradictory thoughts. Part of her thrilled at the prospect of York's company, while another part warned of the inevitable pain that would come when he learned of her past. For surely he would eventually discover its secrets had a way of surfacing, especially those buried in shame. Sunday dawned bright and clear, a perfect autumn day. Harriet dressed with special care in her best church dress, a deep blue that complemented her eyes, and arranged her honey-brown hair in a simple but flattering style. As she studied her reflection, she allowed herself a moment of hope that perhaps, just perhaps, she might find acceptance in York's eyes even if the truth became known. Church service passed in a blur, Harriet's attention divided between the minister's sermon on forgiveness and the tall figure seated several pews ahead. When the congregation filed out afterward, York was waiting by the steps, his Sunday best emphasizing the breadth of his shoulders and the lean strength of his frame. "Miss Sinclair," he greeted her formally, mindful of the churchgoers around them. "My buggy is ready whenever you are." "I just need to retrieve my shawl from Widow Parker," Harriet replied, aware of curious glances from townsfolk. Within minutes, they were driving away from Nevada, York handling the team of matched bays with easy skill. The buggy was well sprung and comfortable, polished to a high shine that spoke of care and pride. "You mentioned the river," Harriet asked as they left the town behind. "There's a spot about 3 miles upriver where the bluffs provide a spectacular view," York explained. My mother used to take me there as a boy. It was her favorite place. You've never mentioned your mother before. A shadow crossed his face. She passed when I was 12. Influenza. My father never really recovered from losing her, though he lived another 15 years. I'm sorry, Harriet said softly. It must have been difficult growing up without her guidance. It was, York acknowledged. My father was a good man, but hard, driven by ambition and determined to build something that would last. He taught me about cattle and business, but it was my mother who taught me about beauty and kindness. As they talked, the buggy followed a winding road alongside the river, occasionally climbing to higher ground that offered glimpses of the water below, sunlight dancing on its surface. True to York's word, the autumn colors were magnificent maples blazing red, oaks in russet and gold, all reflected in the calm surface of the river. They came eventually to a clearing atop a bluff, where York halted the horses. He helped Harriet down from the buggy, his hands strong and steady at her waist. For a moment after her feet touched the ground, they remained close, his hands lingering as their eyes met. Harriet stepped back first, turning toward the view to hide the flush in her cheeks. It's beautiful, she breathed, genuinely awed by the panorama before them. The river curved gracefully below, bordered by trees in their full autumn glory, the distant hills softened by a light haze. Yes, it is, York agreed, though when Harriet glanced at him, she found him looking not at the view but at her. He had brought a blanket which he spread on the ground and a small basket containing bread, cheese, and apples. They sat together, enjoying the simple meal and talking of books they had both read, discoveries made by pupils in Harriet's classroom, and York's plans for expanding his ranch's operations. I've been experimenting with new breeding techniques, he explained, his face animated with enthusiasm. The traditional longhorns are hardy but produce tough meat. By crossbreeding with Hereford bulls, I hope to develop a herd that maintains the longhorn's resilience while producing better beef. That sounds quite innovative, Harriet remarked, charmed by his passion. Have you had success so far? Promising results with the first crossbred calves. They're growing faster and showing good meat development. He laughed suddenly. I apologize, cattle breeding must be terribly dull conversation for you. Not at all, Harriet assured him. I find your commitment to improvement admirable. It reminds me of my approach to teaching, always seeking better methods to reach each child's potential. Their conversation flowed easily, hours passing unnoticed until the sun began its westward descent. Reluctantly, York suggested they should start back to town before darkness fell. As they drove, a comfortable silence settled between them, broken only when York spoke in a more serious tone. Harriet, I've greatly enjoyed your company today. I hope you'll allow me to call on you again. Harriet's happiness at his words was immediately tempered by anxiety. If York was formally declaring his interest, as his tone suggested, honesty demanded she give him reason to reconsider. York, she began carefully, you've been very kind, but there are things about me you don't know, things that might change your regard. His hands remained steady on the reins, his profile strong against the setting sun. We all have pasts, Harriet. Whatever yours may contain, I doubt it would alter my feelings. You can't know that, she insisted, her voice tight with emotion. York drew the buggy to a stop, turning to face her fully. Then tell me, he said simply. Whatever burden you're carrying, share it with me. Harriet looked into his eyes, searching for the strength to either confess or firmly end whatever was growing between them. But the words wouldn't come. Not here, not now. I can't, she whispered. Not yet. Instead of disappointment or frustration, understanding filled his expression. When you're ready, then. I'm a patient man, Harriet. He guided the horses forward again, and they completed the journey to town in thoughtful silence. When they reached the boarding house, York helped her down and walked her to the door. "Thank you for a lovely afternoon," Harriet said formally, retreating behind politeness. "The pleasure was mine," he replied. Then, more softly, "I meant what I said, Harriet. When you're ready to talk, I'll listen without judgment." She nodded, unable to trust her voice, and quickly entered the house. In the privacy of her room, Harriet removed her hat and sank onto the edge of her bed, emotions warring within her. York's patience and understanding only made her situation more painful. How could she tell him the truth? And yet, how could she allow his feelings to deepen without doing so? The following weeks brought an intensification of their careful courtship. York called at the boarding house on Wednesday evenings and Saturday afternoons. They attended church socials together, walked by the river, and shared stories of their lives, though Harriet carefully edited her own past, focusing on her education and teaching experiences, while omitting the events that had driven her from St. Louis. As autumn gave way to winter, Harriet found herself falling deeply in love with York. His strength and integrity, his kindness toward others, his respect for her work as a teacher, all combined to create a man unlike any she had known before. And yet, the closer they grew, the heavier her secret became. December brought the first snow and preparations for Christmas celebrations. Harriet threw herself into organizing a holiday program for her pupils, grateful for the distraction from her personal dilemma. The children practiced recitations and carols to perform for their parents on the last day before the Christmas break. York appeared at the schoolhouse one afternoon as Harriet was supervising rehearsals, a team of ranch hands behind him carrying a magnificent pine tree. "A Christmas surprise," he explained, directing his men to set up the tree in the corner of the classroom. "And these." He produced a box containing handmade ornaments, wooden stars, painted pine cones, and paper angels. The children cheered and eagerly began decorating, while Harriet watched York with a heart full of conflicting emotions. Each thoughtful gesture made her love him more, even as it increased her dread of losing him when the truth emerged. "You've given them a Christmas they'll always remember," she told him softly. "It was my mother's tradition," he replied. "Every year she made sure the ranch hands and their families had a proper celebration, no matter how tight times were." After the children were dismissed, York lingered, helping Harriet tidy the classroom. When they finished, he took her hand, his expression serious. "Harriet, I'd like you to join me for Christmas dinner at the ranch," he said. "I've invited my foreman's family and a few others who have no relatives nearby. Widow Parker is welcome too, of course." The invitation represented another step forward in their relationship, a public acknowledgement of her importance to him. Harriet hesitated, knowing what her answer should be yet unable to voice it. "I need to give you an answer," she said instead, her voice barely audible, York's brow furrowed. "About dinner." "There's no rush, no," Harriet interrupted, gathering her courage. "About what you said that day by the river, about my past." Understanding dawned in his eyes and he nodded slowly. "I'm listening." Harriet moved away from him, needing distance for what she was about to say. She stared out the schoolhouse window at the snow-covered yard, her back to York. "In St. Louis, I was engaged to be married," she began, each word an effort. "Edward Harrington was from one of the city's oldest families, charming, handsome, and, I thought, honorable. My father had died, leaving my mother and me in reduced circumstances, though we maintained our social connections. The marriage would have secured our position." She paused, steeling herself for the most difficult part. 3 months before the wedding, I allowed Edward liberties that should have been reserved for marriage. I believed his promises, his declarations of love. When I discovered I was with child, I went to him in panic and shame." Her voice broke, but she forced herself to continue. "He denied responsibility, claimed I had been with others, broke our engagement publicly and humiliated me. My mother stood by me, but society turned its back. I lost the baby in the 4th month, perhaps from stress and grief. After that, there was nothing left for me in St. Louis." The silence that followed her confession seemed endless. Harriet couldn't bring herself to turn around, to see the disgust or disappointment she was certain would be written on York's face. "Harriet," he finally said, his voice rough with emotion, "look at me." Slowly, reluctantly, she turned. York stood where she had left him, his expression not what she had expected. There was no revulsion, no judgment, only a deep, pained understanding. "I'm so sorry," he said simply, "for all you've endured alone." "I was foolish," Harriet whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Naive and trusting when I should have been vigilant. I've brought shame upon myself that can never be erased." "No," York said firmly, crossing the room to stand before her. "The shame belongs to the man who betrayed your trust, not to you." Harriet shook her head in denial. "You don't understand. In the eyes of society, of God, I've sinned terribly." "I understand more than you know," York countered. "And I believe God sees the heart, not just actions. Yours is good and kind, Harriet. Whatever mistakes you've made, they don't define you." "How can you say that?" she asked brokenly. "Now that you know the truth, how can you still look at me with anything but contempt?" York gently took her hands in his. "Because I love you, Harriet. I have, almost from the moment I first saw you in this schoolhouse, so determined to build something meaningful. Nothing you've told me changes that." Harriet stared at him in disbelief. "You can't mean that. I'm ruined, York. If people knew—" "I don't care what others might think," he interrupted. "And your past doesn't make you ruined in my eyes. It makes you human, someone who loved unwisely perhaps, but with a true heart." Fresh tears filled Harriet's eyes, these born of wonder rather than pain. "I don't deserve your understanding." "You deserve far more," York said softly. "You deserve happiness and peace." Harriet drew a shuddering breath. "I've been so afraid to tell you, so afraid of seeing your regard turn to disgust." "Never," he assured her, his hands tightening on hers. "Harriet, when I said I wanted to court you, it wasn't on condition of a perfect past. We all carry burdens. We all make mistakes. Not like mine," she insisted, unable to fully accept his forgiveness. York's expression grew solemn. "Do you trust me, Harriet?" "Yes," she answered without hesitation, surprising herself with the certainty of it. "Then believe me when I say this. Your worth isn't diminished by what happened in St. Louis. Not to me, and not to God." Harriet looked into his eyes, searching for any hint of insincerity or reservation. Finding none, she whispered, "I love you too, York. I've tried not to, knowing I had no right to such happiness, but I couldn't help myself." "You have every right," he said fiercely. Then, more gently, "Will you come to Christmas dinner now? As the woman I love and hope to make my wife someday, if you'll have me." The directness of his question stunned her. "You can't possibly be proposing, not officially," York clarified with a small smile. "That will come later with a proper ring and on bended knee. But I want you to know my intentions, Harriet. I want to build a life with you if you'll allow it." Overwhelmed, Harriet could only nod. "I'll come to dinner," she managed, her voice thick with emotion. "And York, thank you for listening, for understanding." "Always," he promised, raising her hands to his lips and pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. As they left the schoolhouse together, Harriet felt a lightness she hadn't experienced in years, as if the weight of her secret had been not only lifted, but carried away entirely. York walked beside her through the snowy street, his presence solid and reassuring. Christmas dinner at the Jackman ranch was everything Harriet could have hoped for: warm, welcoming, and filled with laughter. The spacious ranch house was decorated with evergreen boughs and red ribbons, candles glowing in every window. York's staff and their families greeted Harriet with genuine friendliness, clearly taking their cue from their employer's evident affection for the schoolteacher. Widow Parker, who had accepted York's invitation with barely concealed delight, watched the couple with knowing eyes. "He looks at you the way a man should look at the woman he loves," she commented quietly as they helped prepare the feast in the large kitchen. "He knows everything," Harriet confided, her voice low, "about St. Louis, and still he cares for me." The widow nodded, unsurprised. "Good men recognize goodness in others, my dear. Your mistake doesn't change who you are at heart." The dinner itself was sumptuous: roast turkey, ham, mountains of mashed potatoes, various vegetables from the ranch's root cellar, and pies of every description. York sat at the head of the table with Harriet at his right hand, a position of honor that signaled his serious intentions to everyone present. After dinner, there was music. One of the ranch hands played fiddle while his wife accompanied on piano. Children received small gifts York had purchased in town, their excited voices filling the house with joy. As the evening drew to a close, York led Harriet onto the wide covered porch at the front of the house. Snow was falling gently, transforming the landscape into a pristine white expanse broken only by the dark line of the road leading to town. "This has been wonderful," Harriet said, drawing her shawl closer against the cold. "Thank you for including me." "Thank you for coming," York replied. "Having you here, it's made this the best Christmas I can remember since my mother was alive." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small package wrapped in silver paper. "I have something for you. Not an engagement ring," he added with a smile, "though that will come when you're ready. But something I hope you'll accept as a token of my feelings." Harriet carefully unwrapped the gift to reveal a delicate gold locket. When she opened it, she found a pressed wildflower inside, tiny and perfect. "It's a prairie rose," York explained. "The first flower to bloom on the plains after winter. My mother always said it represented hope and resilience, beauty that persists despite harsh conditions." Tears pricked Harriet's eyes as she understood the symbolism. "It's beautiful, York. I'll treasure it always." "May I?" he asked, taking the locket from her trembling fingers. When she nodded and turned, he fastened it around her neck, his fingers warm against her skin. When she faced him again, York's expression was tender yet serious. "Harriet, I want you to know that whatever the future holds, whatever challenges we may face, I'll stand beside you. Your burdens are mine to share, your joys mine to celebrate." Overwhelmed by emotion, Harriet could find no adequate words. Instead, she rose on tiptoe and pressed her lips to his in a kiss that conveyed all she couldn't say: her gratitude, her love, her hope for their future together. York's arms encircled her gently, his response both reverent and passionate. When they finally parted, his eyes shone with a happiness that mirrored her own. "Merry Christmas, Harriet," he murmured. "Merry Christmas, York," she replied, knowing that this was indeed the merriest Christmas of her life and the beginning of many more to come. The weeks following Christmas passed in a blur of happiness for Harriet. School resumed in January, but now her evenings and weekends were filled with York's company. They attended socials together, dined with friends, and spent quiet hours by the fire in Widow Parker's parlor, discussing books or simply enjoying each other's presence. Word spread quickly through Nevada that Yorkton Jackman was officially courting the schoolteacher, and while Harriet initially feared gossip or resentment, she found instead that the townspeople largely approved of the match. York was respected throughout the county, and Harriet had earned the community's goodwill through her dedicated teaching. By February, York had begun making more permanent plans. One crisp Saturday morning, he arrived at the boarding house with his buggy, a mysterious smile playing at his lips. "I have something to show you," he said, helping Harriet into the seat. "A surprise." They drove north out of town, following the road that led toward York's ranch but turning off onto a narrower track before reaching the main property. After about a mile, they crested a small hill, and York drew the horses to a halt. Below them lay a picturesque valley, sheltered by gentle slopes and bisected by a small stream. Near its center stood a half-finished house, the foundation complete and the frame rising solidly, though it was clearly still months from completion. "What is this?" Harriet asked, though something in her heart already knew. "Our home," York replied simply. "If you want it to be." Harriet stared at him in wonder. "You're building a house, before I've even formally accepted you." York laughed, the sound warm in the winter air. "Call it an act of faith or perhaps optimism. The land is part of my ranch, but separate enough to be our own place. I thought you might like having some independence while still being close to the main operations." He helped her down from the buggy and led her closer to the construction site. "It will have 5 bedrooms, he explained, pointing out the layout. "One for us, one for your study or library, and 3 for—" He hesitated, a slight flush coloring his cheeks. "For children," Harriet finished softly, her heart constricting. "York, I should tell you the doctor in St. Louis after I lost the baby. He warned that I might have difficulty carrying a child to term." York's expression didn't change. "Then we'll take special care when the time comes," he said. "And if God blesses us with children, we'll be grateful. If not, we'll find other ways to fill our home with love." Tears blurred Harriet's vision. How had she found this man, this heart that seemed to have limitless capacity for understanding and acceptance? "There's more," York continued, leading her to where the front porch would eventually be. "From here, you'll be able to see the school. I made sure of that when choosing the location. It's close enough that you can easily continue teaching if you wish, even after we're married." "You'd want me to keep teaching?" Harriet asked in surprise. Most men expected their wives to retire from such work upon marriage. "If it brings you joy, absolutely," York confirmed. "You have a gift, Harriet. I wouldn't ask you to set it aside unless you wanted to." Harriet was silent for a long moment, overwhelmed by the thought and care he had put into planning their future together. "When will it be finished?" she finally asked. "By early summer, the builder says, which brings me to another question." York took her hands in his expression growing serious. "Harriet Sinclair, I love you more than I ever thought possible. You've brought light and purpose to my life in ways I can't even fully express. Will you do me the great honor of becoming my wife this June when our home is ready to receive us?" Though she had known the question was coming, Harriet still found herself breathless at hearing it spoken aloud. "Yes," she answered without hesitation. "Yes, I will marry you, York." His face broke into a radiant smile as he reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box. Inside lay a ring, a perfect diamond set in gold, flanked by 2 smaller sapphires. "It was my mother's," he explained as he slipped it onto her finger. "My father gave it to me before he died, saying it should go to the woman who captured my heart as completely as my mother had captured his." The ring fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her hand. Harriet looked from it to York's face, her heart so full it seemed it might burst. "I love you," she whispered, reaching up to touch his cheek. "So much that it frightens me sometimes." "Don't be afraid," he murmured, drawing her close. "Not of love, not of the future, not of the past. We face it all together now." His kiss was a promise, sealing their engagement and the life they would build together. When they finally parted, Harriet felt a certainty she had never known before that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would meet them side by side, News of their engagement spread quickly through Nevada. Widow Parker insisted on hosting a small celebration at the boarding house, inviting the mayor, the minister and his wife, and several other prominent citizens to toast the happy couple. York's ranch hands organized their own congratulatory gathering, presenting the couple with a handmade quilt that the foreman's wife had secretly been working on since Christmas. As winter gradually yielded to spring, Harriet divided her time between teaching and preparations for her new life. York brought her to the house site regularly, showing her the progress and consulting her on details of the interior. She chose wallpapers and paint colors, discussed furniture placement, and helped plan the kitchen layout. One evening in early April, as they sat on the boarding house porch enjoying the mild evening air, York mentioned a matter that Harriet had been avoiding. "I've written to my mother's sister in Kansas City," he said casually. "She's my only living relative, and I'd like her to attend the wedding if her health permits." Harriet nodded, then hesitantly voiced the concern that had been growing in her mind. "York, should I? Do you think I should write to my mother? She doesn't know where I settled after leaving St. Louis." York's expression grew thoughtful. "That's entirely your decision, Harriet. Would having her at our wedding bring you joy?" "Yes," Harriet admitted. "Despite everything, I miss her terribly. She stood by me when everyone else turned away." "Then write to her," York encouraged. "Invite her to come early. Stay with us after the wedding if she wishes. I'd like to know the woman who raised such a remarkable daughter." That night, Harriet composed a careful letter to her mother, explaining her new life in Nevada, her engagement to York, and her hope that they might be reunited at the wedding. She described York's character and kindness, emphasizing that he knew her full history and loved her nonetheless. Sending the letter felt like releasing a long-held breath, frightening yet liberating. Whether her mother could or would come remained uncertain, but Harriet had opened the door to reconciliation. May brought warming days and the final touches to their new home. Furniture arrived from St. Louis, ordered according to Harriet's specifications but funded by York's generous budget. The house took on a character that blended his practical frontier sensibilities with her more refined tastes, sturdy pieces and elegant designs, comfort balanced with beauty. It was during this busy time that Harriet received a response from her mother. With trembling hands, she opened the letter, York at her side for support. "My dearest daughter," the letter began, "words cannot express my joy at receiving your letter. I have prayed daily for news of you since your departure, and to learn that you have found not only security but true love fills my heart to overflowing. Of course I will come to your wedding. In truth, wild horses could not keep me away." Tears of relief streamed down Harriet's face as she read the remainder of the letter, which detailed her mother's plans to arrive 2 weeks before the wedding. York squeezed her hand in silent support, his own eyes suspiciously bright. "She's coming," Harriet whispered, looking up at him. "And she wants to meet you." "I look forward to it," York replied with genuine warmth. "We'll make sure the guest bedroom in the new house is ready for her arrival." As the wedding date approached, final preparations consumed their attention. The ceremony would be held in the church, followed by a reception at their new home, allowing them to begin their married life there immediately. Harriet ordered a simple but elegant white dress from a dressmaker in Kansas City, and York had a new suit tailored for the occasion. 3 weeks before the wedding, Harriet was at the schoolhouse preparing final examinations when she heard a commotion outside. Looking through the window, she saw a stage pulling up, unusual at this hour. Her heart skipped a beat when a familiar figure descended, a slender woman in a gray traveling dress, her once dark hair now liberally streaked with silver. "Mother," Harriet breathed, rushing outside. Catherine Sinclair turned at the sound of footsteps, her face lighting up at the sight of her daughter. "Harriet! Oh, my darling girl!" They embraced tearfully in the schoolyard, oblivious to curious onlookers. When they finally separated, Catherine held her daughter at arm's length, studying her face. "You look well," she declared. "Happy. Your letters didn't exaggerate." "I am happy," Harriet confirmed. "Happier than I ever thought possible after everything." "Good. That's all I've ever wanted for you." Catherine glanced around at the schoolhouse. "So this is where you've been shaping young minds. It suits you." They collected Catherine's luggage and walked to the boarding house, where she would stay until the wedding. Along the way, Harriet pointed out town landmarks and introduced her mother to shopkeepers and neighbors they encountered. "You've made a place for yourself here," Catherine observed approvingly. "I'm proud of you, Harriet." That evening, York joined them for dinner at the boarding house, meeting Catherine for the first time. His manner was respectful but warm, treating her with the deference due his future mother-in-law while putting her at ease with his natural charm. "Mr. Jackman," Catherine said as the meal drew to a close, "I must thank you for seeing in my daughter what she truly is, rather than the mistakes society condemned her for." York's gaze moved from Catherine to Harriet, his eyes softening. "The only thanks I need is the privilege of spending my life with her, Mrs. Sinclair. And please, call me York." In the days that followed, Catherine helped with the final preparations for the wedding and settling of the new house. She and Harriet spent precious hours reconnecting, healing old wounds and building bridges across the months of separation. York often found them laughing together over shared memories, or bent in serious conversation about plans for the future. One week before the wedding, Harriet was helping Catherine arrange flowers in the parlor of the new house when her mother broached a subject they had been avoiding. "Have you thought about children, Harriet?" she asked gently. "After what the doctor said in St. Louis." Harriet's hand stilled on the roses she was trimming. "Yes, we've discussed it. York knows there may be difficulties, but he says it doesn't matter. If we're blessed with children, we'll rejoice. If not, we'll find fulfillment in other ways." Catherine nodded slowly. "He's a good man, your York. Not many would be so understanding." "He is," Harriet agreed softly. "Sometimes I still can't believe he chose me, knowing everything. Because he sees what I've always seen, a daughter with a heart full of love and a spirit of remarkable strength." Catherine touched Harriet's cheek gently. "You deserve this happiness, my darling. Never doubt that." The wedding day dawned clear and perfect, as if nature itself approved of the union. The church was filled with townspeople, ranch hands and their families, and a few guests from neighboring communities. York waited at the altar, tall and handsome in his new suit, his face lighting up as Harriet appeared at the back of the church on her mother's arm. Her dress was simple but elegant white satin with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs, her honey-brown hair arranged in a crown of small white flowers. She carried a bouquet of prairie roses, a tribute to the flower in her locket and what it symbolized for them both. The ceremony was traditional and deeply moving. When the minister asked, "Who gives this woman?" Catherine's voice was clear and proud as she answered, "I do." And when York and Harriet exchanged vows, promising to love and cherish each other in sickness and health, for better or worse, there wasn't a dry eye in the congregation. The reception at their new home was a joyous celebration that lasted well into the evening. Townspeople and ranch hands alike toasted the couple, danced to fiddle music on the wide front porch, and admired the beautiful house that would be their home. As twilight deepened into night, the guests gradually departed, leaving the newlyweds alone in their new home. Catherine had discreetly arranged to stay at the boarding house for the night, giving them privacy for their first evening as husband and wife. In the quiet of their bedroom, with only lamplight illuminating the space, York took Harriet's hands in his. "Happy, Mrs. Jackman?" he asked softly. "Completely," she answered, her heart overflowing with love. "I never imagined such happiness could be mine." "It's only the beginning," he promised, drawing her close. "We have a lifetime ahead of us." In the months and years that followed, that promise proved true. Their home became the heart of the Jackman ranch operations, with York gradually expanding both the cattle business and their landholdings. Harriet continued teaching for 2 years before retiring to focus on helping York manage the ranch's growing interests and their increasingly busy social calendar. Catherine Sinclair decided to remain in Nevada, moving into a small house in town that York purchased for her. Having her mother nearby was a blessing Harriet hadn't dared hope for, allowing them to rebuild their relationship and create new memories together. In the spring of their second year of marriage, Harriet discovered she was expecting a child. The news brought both joy and anxiety, given her previous loss, but York surrounded her with care and the best medical attention available. Dr. Matthews, the town physician, monitored her closely, ordering complete bed rest when complications arose in the 5th month. York rarely left her side during that difficult time, reading to her, bringing ranch business to their bedroom so she could still offer advice, and assuring her repeatedly that her health mattered more than anything else. Catherine visited daily, bringing small treats and distracting Harriet with town gossip. Their son was born in the depths of winter, a healthy, robust boy with his father's storm-gray eyes, and a lusty cry that announced his arrival to the entire household. They named him Samuel, after York's father, with Edward as a middle name in memory of Harriet's father. "He's perfect," York whispered, cradling his newborn son with reverent hands, "just like his mother." Harriet watched them from her bed, exhausted but filled with a happiness so intense it brought tears to her eyes. "We did it," she murmured. "He's here, he's healthy." "Never doubted it for a moment," York claimed, though the shadows beneath his eyes spoke of many sleepless nights of worry. "You're the strongest woman I know, Harriet Jackman." Little Samuel thrived, growing into a curious, energetic toddler who delighted in exploring the ranch under his father's watchful eye. York proved to be a natural father, patient and loving, balancing discipline with tenderness in a way his own father never had. To everyone's surprise, Harriet discovered she was expecting again when Samuel was barely 18 months old. This pregnancy progressed more smoothly than the first, resulting in the birth of twin daughters Catherine and Elizabeth, named for both grandmothers. Life settled into a pattern of controlled chaos that Harriet embraced wholeheartedly. There were difficult times, of course, drought years that threatened the ranch's prosperity, childhood illnesses that kept them awake for days, and the natural conflicts that arise in any marriage. But through it all, the foundation of love and mutual respect that York and Harriet had built remained unshaken. When the children were old enough for formal education, Harriet returned to teaching part-time, instructing not only her own children but also those of ranch hands and neighboring families in the schoolroom York had added to their home. Her mother assisted with the younger children, creating a multi-generational household filled with learning and laughter. On the 10th anniversary of their wedding, York surprised Harriet with a gift, the deed to a plot of land adjacent to the schoolhouse in town, and plans for a proper school building to replace the aging structure where she had first taught. "The Harriet Jackman School," he explained as she examined the architectural drawings. "Nevada has grown enough to need more than one teacher and one room. This will be your legacy, beyond our children, a place of learning that will shape this community for generations." Moved beyond words, Harriet could only embrace him, her tears of gratitude dampening his shirt. Later that evening, after the children were asleep and they sat together on their front porch watching the sunset, she finally found words to express her feelings. 10 years ago, I came to Nevada believing my life was effectively over, that the best I could hope for was quiet anonymity and the chance to be useful through teaching. I was carrying so much shame, so much pain. York's hand found hers, warm and familiar. And now? Harriet smiled, looking out over the ranch that had become her home, thinking of their beautiful children asleep upstairs, of the community that had embraced her, of the love that had healed wounds she once thought would never close. "Now I know that life doesn't end with our mistakes," she said softly. "It only truly begins when we find someone willing to help us carry them and move beyond them." York raised her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her wedding ring. "I told you once that your burdens were mine to share. I meant it then, and I mean it still." "I know," Harriet replied, leaning her head against his shoulder, "and that has made all the difference." As twilight deepened into night, they sat together in comfortable silence, secure in the knowledge that the life they had built, founded on understanding, forgiveness, and enduring love, was stronger than any shame or sorrow either had known before finding each other in the wild heart of Nevada, Missouri. In the years that followed, the Jackman family continued to flourish and grow. Samuel followed in his father's footsteps, developing a keen interest in cattle breeding and ranch management from an early age. The twins, though identical in appearance, displayed vastly different temperaments and interests. Catherine inherited her father's practical nature and love of the outdoors, while Elizabeth showed Harriet's affinity for books and teaching. When Samuel was 16, Harriet gave birth to another son, James, a surprise blessing who completed their family circle. Though the age gap between him and his siblings was significant, James was adored by all, especially his older brother, who took it upon himself to teach the boy everything about ranch life. As Nevada grew from a small frontier town into a prosperous community, York and Harriet played central roles in its development. The Harriet Jackman School became the pride of the county, eventually expanding to include both primary and secondary education. York's innovative breeding programs transformed cattle ranching in the region, earning him recognition throughout the state. Their home remained a gathering place for friends, family, and community events. Christmas celebrations became particularly legendary, with former pupils returning year after year to join in the festivities. Harriet Sinclair, though advancing in years, remained a vital part of their lives, her quiet wisdom and unfailing support a cornerstone of the family's strength. On their 25th wedding anniversary, the entire town turned out for a celebration that doubled as a tribute to their contributions to Nevada. Former students, business associates, and friends from near and far came to honor the couple whose love story had become something of a local legend. During the festivities, York pulled Harriet aside for a private moment on the same porch where they had spent so many evenings together. Though silver now threaded his dark hair and lines of experience marked both their faces, his eyes still held the same tenderness when they looked upon her. 25 years, he marveled, taking her hands in his. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday that I walked into that schoolhouse and saw you for the first time." Harriet smiled, remembering that day with perfect clarity. "I was so determined to keep my distance from everyone, especially handsome ranchers with kind eyes. Thank God I'm stubborn," York chuckled. Then, more seriously, "I have something for you." From his pocket, he withdrew a small box similar to the one that had contained her engagement ring all those years ago. Inside lay a gold band set with alternating diamonds and sapphires, an anniversary ring, designed to complement her original one. "One stone for each of our children, and the diamonds between representing the years we've shared," he explained as he slipped it onto her finger alongside her wedding band. Tears filled Harriet's eyes as she admired the thoughtful gift. "It's beautiful, York. Perfect." "Like the woman wearing it," he replied, drawing her close. As they rejoined the celebration, Harriet caught sight of their children Samuel deep in conversation with Judge Harrison's daughter, a young woman he'd been courting with obvious intentions. The twins helping serve refreshments, and young James darting between guests with the energy only a 7-year-old could possess. Her mother sat in a place of honor, receiving guests with the grace that had once made her a notable hostess in St. Louis society. Nearby, York's aunt from Kansas City, now in her 80s but still sharp of mind and tongue, entertained a group with stories of York's childhood visits. "Mama," Elizabeth appeared at her side, eyes bright with excitement. "Professor Miller from the State University is here. He says he's read my essay on educational methods and wants to discuss it with me." "Then you mustn't keep him waiting," Harriet encouraged, heart swelling with pride at her daughter's academic achievements. Later, as the evening wound down, York and Harriet found themselves surrounded by their immediate family for a private toast. Samuel, now a handsome young man of 21, raised his glass first. "To my parents, whose love has been the foundation of everything good in our lives. You've taught us by example what it means to face challenges together, to support each other's dreams, and to build something lasting. May we all be fortunate enough to find the kind of partnership you share." "Hear, hear," echoed Catherine Sinclair, her voice wavering slightly with emotion. "I have watched your love transform not only your own lives but touch countless others. It has been the privilege of my lifetime to witness it." As glasses clinked and more toasts followed, Harriet exchanged a look with York that needed no words, a look that acknowledged all they had overcome, all they had built, and the deep, abiding love that had made it possible. That night, after guests had departed and children had retired to their rooms, York and Harriet stood together on their porch as they had so many nights before, watching stars appear in the velvet Missouri sky. "Remember that day by the river?" York asked softly. "When you tried to warn me away by hinting at your past," Harriet nodded, leaning against his solid strength. "I was so certain you would reject me once you knew the truth. And I was so certain nothing you could tell me would change how I felt," York recalled. "We were both right in our own ways. Your past was painful, but it helped shape you into the woman I love beyond measure." "I still think of that moment sometimes," Harriet admitted. "When I finally told you everything, and instead of turning away, you offered to help carry my shame." York's arm tightened around her waist. "It was never yours alone to carry, Harriet. None of us should bear our burdens in isolation. That's what love means, sharing not just the joys but the sorrows, the triumphs and the failures." "You taught me that," she said, turning in his embrace to face him. "And I've spent 25 years learning how right you were." His kiss was gentle but held all the passion of their younger days, tempered now by the deep understanding that comes only with years of shared life. When they parted, Harriet saw in York's eyes the same love that had first given her hope for a new beginning, a love that had never dimmed but only grown stronger with each passing year. "To the next 25, he suggested with a smile. "And beyond," Harriet promised, her heart full of gratitude for the life they had built together, a life that had begun the day a broken-hearted schoolteacher had whispered, "I'm ashamed," and a steadfast cowboy had replied, "Then let me carry your shame too."